Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The fellas are back again with another Florida State commitment update as former West Virginia and Kentucky defensive lineman Tomiwa Durojaiye commits to Florida State out of the transfer portal, and Mike Norvell in this Florida State program really gaining some momentum in the transfer portal. Obviously had an extremely busy weekend where they hosted a ton of visitors and are starting to landing those commitments. I want to talk about Tomiwa, talk about what he brings to this Florida State program. But I do want to note something that many of you guys pointed out yesterday when we were talking about some of the other transfer portal commits, and that is Florida State and Mike Norvell are grabbing guys from the transfer portal that have multiple years of eligibility remaining. And I think, make no mistake, the national media will say Florida State relies on the transfer portal too heavily. They don't develop their own guys. A lot of these guys that they're getting in the transfer portal, especially this cycle, have multiple years to develop within this Florida State program. And make no mistake about it, this is a Florida State program that has done phenomenal in terms of developing high school talent, turning them into very good football players at the Power 5 level. A guy like Tomiwa, who's only going into his third year of college football, has 3 years of eligibility remaining, I think is a guy that it really excites you about. Not only you're getting a really good football player right now, but you might be getting a really, really good football player in 2025 and 2026. Want to talk about Tomiwa. Want to talk about a few other transfer portal targets that have emerged for Florida State in the last couple of hours. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Florida State fans. This has been a program we've talked a ton about over the last couple of days. And the amount of support, the nice comments you guys have left, that stuff means the world. I love doing this. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas like you guys have. If y'all do enjoy the content, enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Tomiwa, talk about what he brings to the table. And I want to start with the trajectory that he's on as a football player, right? He came into Kentucky redshirted in 2022 and then transfers to West Virginia in the 2023 season and continues to earn more playing time as he kind of was just a guy that was hard to keep off the field. Now, I had to go back and watch some of his games back because I wasn't totally familiar with how he plays. A couple things that I noticed. One, that bowl game against North Carolina in December, he was a menace. This is a guy that has extremely heavy hands, a very, very powerful athlete, and kind of just goes right into tackles and collapses pockets. And another thing we talk about, which with edge defenders, specifically with Florida State, we have this conversation with Jared Verse all the time, is a lot of those edge defenders really good against the run. And Tomiwa is one of those guys. He's extremely powerful. He's got very, very strong hands, and he wins at the point of attack. He's very good at stacking, shedding blocks, and making plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. That's probably what I love the most. And now you're not getting the most bursty, bendy edge rusher that you've seen, right? And I think what made Jared Verse special is he could win with burst and bend and win with his power going right through tackles. Tomiwa is much more of a heavy-handed guy that wants to go right through tackles. And he's a guy that I could see maybe even kicking inside. And I think the position versatility is something that is really cool about a guy like Tomiwa, right? He's a guy that at 6'4", 278 pounds, only going into his third year of college football, I could certainly see him getting up to 290, 300 and just moving inside. He carries 280 extremely well. So I'm excited to see what they decide to do with him. And another conversation that I think is massive when we're talking about this edition is this is one of the position groups that Florida State needed to address in the transfer portal. And again, what is the main purpose of the transfer portal, at least in my mind, is looking at your roster and saying, where are the cracks in the foundation? Or where are holes in our depth chart that we need to address immediately heading into 2024. And I think that defensive line, with all the talent that you have moving on from the program, was certainly one of those spots. And I think a guy like Tomiwa certainly fills in some of that lack of depth and that void of talent that you had on that defensive line. It's really important not only to have a really talented defensive line, but to have a deep defensive line. Like what we talk about, we have this conversation a lot. What's so special about Michigan and Georgia and those defenses being so elite? They have really good players on that defensive line, but they also have a ton of depth. So they're keeping those big bodies fresh throughout 4 quarters of a game, but more importantly, 12, 13, 14 games of a season as well. And Tomiwa, I think one could be a phenomenal starter for Florida State, but also a phenomenal depth piece as well, depending on how quick that development is. And that's what I'd stress. This is a guy that has 3 years of eligibility remaining. I think he's definitely going to play a role with Florida State in 2024, but could be a guy that you're talking about in 2025 and in 2026 as being a very productive player for Florida State. There was reasons why Auburn, Miami were all in on this kid because the upside, where he's going as a football player, the trajectory of this athlete, that's probably what's most enticing. Now, there is another name that I want to mention in the transfer portal really quick for Florida State fans, and that is Richie Leonard IV, potentially taking a visit to Tallahassee this weekend. And we had a conversation, like this offensive line is definitely a position group there. They want to add talent, they want to add depth, and they want to add reliable starters. And a guy like Richie Leonard IV in a Florida Gators offensive line that kind of flat out stunk this year, Richie Leonard IV was pretty damn good. And he's a guy that faced over 416 pass blocking opportunities for Florida, only gave up 16 pressures. He can move bodies in the run game, only being at 6'2", 310, plays with the low pad level and good leverage. This would be a really nice addition. It is difficult to find starting caliber offensive linemen that are available in the transfer portal. Richie Leonard IV is that guy, right? Started all 12 games for the Florida Gators. He's a reliable guy on that inside that is good in pass pro and can get that run game going. That is exactly what Florida State wants to do. And you start taking a look at what Florida State has done in the transfer portal, you're starting to see a lot of boxes checked. And I think that Florida State probably still wants to add a couple off-ball linebackers. That's probably the position that you're saying, hey, we got to get that right heading into 2024. And again, that's not me saying I don't believe in the young linebackers on this Florida State roster. It's more that you want to provide just a high floor in terms of what you're getting with these linebackers heading into 2024. That's probably the position that you want to address the most. But you start looking at the boxes that Florida State wanted to check. They got their quarterback in DJU, who, again, I think if given that development, like he's going to talk about player trajectory. I mean, DJU struggled early at Clemson. He goes to Oregon State. He gets better as a football player. What if he takes another step and kind of realizes that 5-star potential that he had coming out of high school? That could be a really exciting proposition for Florida State fans. But you start scrolling down this list, and they're just adding a lot of players at positions that they needed to address, right? Malik Benson adding some veteran experience at that wide receiver position who has a ton of upside as a player. Devontae Brown at the cornerback role. And then you start sprinkling in some guys with really big upside, right? Earl Little, who is a top 100 national prospect coming out of high school, didn't play that much at Alabama. We all know what the player Earl Little could be with some development. Jalen Brown, another true freshman at LSU last year who has all the tools to be an elite wide receiver, a ton of burners, another guy that you could really see take a jump for Florida State. Marvin Jones Jr., very similar conversation. Really big fan of the blend of youth that Florida State's bringing in the portal and experienced talent where they needed to. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. A guy like Tomiwa, I think, has a lot of high upside, and I'm really excited to see what he looks like in 2024 because if he continues the progression that he's made since his redshirt freshman or his true freshman year at Kentucky, that's probably what's most exciting for Florida State. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.